Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of the Mystic Feminine podcast. Thank you so much for being here. Today, I wanted to start this episode with a little story time of a somewhat spiritual experience that I had maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And the reason I've been thinking about this moment is because a message that really came very strongly through for me at that time has been coming back and guiding me in the last couple of months. And the message might seem silly, but it's to not take life too seriously. And it might resonate with you, it might not resonate with you. I personally have always, ever since I was a child, had a tendency to take things very seriously. It sounds so obnoxious, but I've always been very deep. And sometimes it's a beautiful thing. And sometimes it's a block. I'm not going to lie to you. Sometimes you're just supposed to be playful and not take things too seriously. But I really have always had a tendency to take things pretty deeply and feel things deeply and perceive things deeply. And again, it's very enriching as a creative to have that kind of perception, but it's also not the most fun. And it's also, like I said, it can be a block, a major block. And again, I'm aware that sounds sometimes like I hate to hear myself say that I'm very deep, but I just, some people are deep and also very playful. Some people are deep and just a bit serious. And that has been me. And it's taken me time to reconnect with my playfulness. I grew up very quickly. Let's just say that. I was a child that matured maybe too young. Yes, definitely. I matured too young, but that's the way it is. Anyway, so about 4 or 5 years ago, for about a year, did a kind of psychology that's called regressive hypnotherapy. And I did it with a professional. I'm saying that because I know that these days it's very easy to get a hypnosis certification. And I think that's wonderful in some cases, but in certain cases, I really think you should choose someone professional in the psychology sense that has a background in psychology and medicine sometimes. So depending on what you're wanting to achieve through the hypnosis, I would be sure I would just make sure to research the person that you choose. So I was doing this with a psychologist, and I wanted to find the root of certain stories that were playing out in my present that I couldn't seem to get out of, certain emotional patterns, mental patterns, just energetic things, and that were playing out in my reality that I knew had their roots in my childhood. And so I wanted to do regressive hypnotherapy for that reason. And it was a beautiful experience. It's obviously always challenging to work through some of these things that come up, but the person that I did it with, she was amazing. And I remembered things from when I was a baby in my mother's arms, certain feelings that I was experiencing, certain perceptions of things, and to really kind of go back to the place where certain fears or certain guilt or whatever began was really powerful. One particular session, we went back to my birth during the hypnosis. And then we went back to before the birth when I was in the womb. And it's a really interesting process. I mean, you can believe in hypnotherapy or not, but it was very interesting. And while I was in the womb, I was experiencing a lot of, let's say, negative or challenging emotions about being there, and there were fears and anxieties, and we were kind of unraveling why was I feeling those things and everything. And then what surprised me is that she brought me back to where I was before the womb. Now, keep in mind, we weren't doing any spiritual work. We were really just focusing on childhood memories, psychology, this kind of thing, that what was in my subconscious. We were really doing psychology. And then I had the most insane vision. I was basically in heaven. I know I sound crazy. Bear with me, okay? Because those who want to stay can stay, those who want to leave can leave. But I had a vision, everything went white. Prior to this moment, I wasn't really able to visualize much. I was really just paying attention to the feelings that were arising, and I wasn't visualizing a whole lot. And then all of a sudden, I was somewhere that was just so bright and so white And I suddenly started giggling. I was filled with joy. And just a moment before, while I was in the womb, I was experiencing challenges and suffering and anxieties and fear and loss and all those things. And suddenly I was in this place that was so white, and I was giggling and I couldn't stop laughing. And then I started to see faces, but I couldn't really see them. They were kind of coming in and out of focus through this light, and we were all kind of dancing in a huge circle, and the circle was so big that I couldn't see. It was like the people were kind of disappearing into a mist, almost into the light. But we were dancing, and all these people were just smiling, and they were full of love, and they were full of joy. They were dancing, they were playful, they were happy to see me. And there was one person in particular I didn't recognize. He was like an old man, and he had the biggest smile on his face, and he took my hand and he was dancing, and he said to me, "Lucia, you just need to stop taking things so seriously." And that was it. That's all he said. And I was laughing and laughing. And then she brought me out of the hypnosis, and I was still filled with these giggles. I literally left that session and walked home trying to contain my laughter. And it wasn't like a nervous laughter. It wasn't like an anxious laughter. It was like a deep belly joy. I couldn't really make sense of what had happened. I mean, I sort of understood from my own spiritual beliefs where I went, and it took me by surprise because I had no intention of having spiritual experiences through these psychology sessions. That message of not taking life too seriously has come back to me every now and then whenever I feel anxiety or fear, or that I'm moving through very big emotions. And like I said, this is going to speak to some people and not to others, but I still think it's a really important message. When you're a sensitive person, things can feel so heavy, and things can really appear very serious. And don't get me wrong, like, life is also serious. Life is real. We are in reality. There are things that are wrong, and we are supposed to react to certain things like injustice and other people suffering, or our own suffering. We need to take them seriously. We need to do something about it, right? Because if we don't take them seriously, then we're just what are we just supposed to laugh at serious situations? No, that's not what I'm saying. But there are certain moments when we can overthink, prolong our own sense of anxiety or suffering, when if we just take a step back for a second, in the grand scheme of things, it's not that serious. Even the worst case scenario that you can think of right now, probably you would be okay on the other side. It might take a lot of time. There might be a lot of pain through the process, but you would be okay. And personally, for me, this vision was also a reminder that even after life ends, there is this joy and this playfulness and this love. And I know this is getting a little woo-woo, but if it resonates, it resonates. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And this message of, even if you spend your whole life taking everything very seriously, when it ends, you'll realize that it wasn't that deep, really. You have lessons, it's hard. You do have to take things seriously in the way that you can't escape your reality. There's no way over it other than through it. You have to take responsibility for yourself. All of these things are true. I'm not saying don't take life seriously to remove yourself from your reality, or to remove yourself from your commitments and your responsibilities. No. But there are definitely times when your anxiety and your suffering don't need to be prolonged and don't need to be so intense and all-consuming. And in those moments, I do think it's important to remember, take it with a grain of salt, because you're going to be okay. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is an answer to a question that I received a lot the other day when I put a little question box up on my Instagram and asked you if there was anything that you wanted to hear me talk about. And quite a few of you asked me about how I got into the business that I'm doing now and what inspired me to do this. And I was kind of reflecting on my journey a bit. And what I realized is that how I have created offerings and created my business has always been first and foremost from a place of experience. So for example, my sacred portrayals which if you haven't seen them or you're not familiar with my work, are printed portraits that you send me a picture of yourself, I print them out, and then I draw over your portrait with gold inks, and I basically illuminate the energy lines of your soul so that you can see yourself in your divine light and your divine beauty. And that was the offering that really kind of begun my business. Those were my first ever commissions. And in 2020, that was basically all I was doing. And the sacred portrayals began years prior to 2020 when I was doing a lot of self-portraits of myself as a form of creativity. And I loved to take the pictures and then I loved to edit them and create, different collages and things like that. I loved the creative process. I didn't enjoy just taking the picture and having a finished image. I loved to do something with that image. And I started to experiment around that time with printing out the images and drawing lines over the top of my self-portraits. I loved that because I finally felt like I could see myself. When I saw a picture of myself, it was one thing, but when I began to draw lines over my face and over my body, I really felt like I was seeing my soul and seeing my inner self. And I became obsessed with doing these types of artworks. I began doing them for myself, and then I began doing them for my friends, and I was posting them on Instagram. And around that time, I didn't have many followers at all, but a few different strangers would come across my work and they would say that they wanted one done of them. And that's when I started doing commissions. At the time, I was charging nothing. I was charging pennies because I at that point still hadn't really built up my self-esteem as an artist who knew how to value her work. So I have compassion for my younger self there. But it was beautiful because I started to realize that maybe making art your work or your career could be possible. I began to see that there were doors that could open in different ways the more I committed to my art and shared it with other people. And so that was the sacred portrayals, and I still do them now. The sacred avatar offerings that I do, those were born from a very similar process where it was at a time when I really was very disconnected from my body. I've shared this in a few different places online before on different podcasts and also on my Instagram, that in 2019, I had an ovarian cyst that was 14 centimeters. And when I found that out, I was so shocked that I had been so disconnected from my body that I hadn't realized that it was in such distress, that I kind of woke up to the fact that I had a body. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I've always been such a sensitive, kind of head in the clouds person that I don't think I really knew seriously that I had a body until that moment, because I had missed so many signals. And it started my journey of connecting with my own femininity because, the issue was in my ovaries, which is your reproductive system as a woman. And well, the fact that I didn't know how to take care of myself or my reproductive system felt like a huge slap in the face. So I made it my mission at that point in time to understand my cycle, my hormones, my body, physically, emotionally, and how everything was connected. And that was the time when I started to create self-portraits of myself digitally. And so if you've seen some of my work on Instagram, you'll see the sacred avatars, the kind of deified women that I draw digitally. Those began back then. So I was using my art to illustrate myself in different poses that felt empowering and almost, deifying myself so that I could see the power of myself as a woman in a body. And to feel physically empowered and rooted in myself. And I was doing that through this art. And I was also using tarot a lot at this time. Tarot I had discovered years and years before, but I was using it now, incorporating it into my process of reconnecting to my femininity and using it as a tool for transformation. And one thing that I forgot to mention is that in order to draw these images of myself, I would do embodiment practices, and I would explore different poses in the mirror through taking videos of myself to try and see, okay, what pose really awakens the goddess in me? What pose really awakens this sense of power and centeredness and rootedness within me? And those were the poses that I would then illustrate. So Sacred Avatar was born from this mix of different practices that I was using to alchemize my own wounds and my own shadows in those areas relating to my relationship to my divine feminine. My following was growing on Instagram at that time, and more women were reaching out to me saying that they saw themselves in the illustrations that I was sharing online. And I was so moved by this, that something that was a representation of of healing and empowering my inner feminine was speaking so deeply to other women that they felt that they really saw their true selves in these artworks. And so I realized that on a really deep personal level, I was touching on something collective. And that's when I created Sacred Avatar, the service where I offer you a tarot reading. You go and do an embodiment practice, you take your self-portraits, and then from one of those poses, which we choose together, I then illustrate the deified version of you in a digital illustration. And I use symbols and sometimes animals or different patterns that might have come up for you during that embodiment practice. And these were the two services that really allowed me to make my art a full-time business. Of course, now I also have a tarot deck and an oracle deck, and those came also from my own personal experiences with tarot and with my divination practice. And so I've always, all that to say that everything that I do comes from my lived experience. That has just always been my process. That's how I'm guided through life. I've never had a plan for where I'm going to go, what I'm going to create with my business. I think now is the first time in my life where I'm really starting to think a little bit more ahead and think about, okay, what is it that I want to build, in the long run? And I think that's important to have as well. But I always leave room for the mystery to guide me, because I know that everything I make has to come from a lived experience. And I don't think that's the truth for everybody. I think some people are here to create businesses and build empires not based on their own deep emotional processes, but that has been the truth for me. And it has required a lot of surrender. And I have to remind myself, even nowadays, now that I have this business, that that's how it began, and that that's how I also always need to, despite how much now I'm trying to plan my future a little better and have, plant certain seeds and create certain foundations, I still have to remind myself that I can't control everything, because the way that my business was born came from me just being in devotion to my inner self and my inner world, and trusting the medicine that came through for me there would be important and relevant to other people. And it takes a lot of trust. It takes a lot of surrender. It's not always comfortable, especially the bigger your business grows, the more you feel that you have to kind of have a hands-on approach to it and be controlling, because there are more responsibilities, of course, and more commitments. But we always need to leave room for that mystery and that trust to ourselves and to the unseen, and to trust the things that are calling us inwards and forwards, the things that inspire you, the things that bring you passion, the things that are healing you. These are not insignificant things. And if ever you feel uninspired, or you feel that you don't know what you desire, or that you don't know what those things are, what is bringing you passion, what it is that you want to express, these are all symptoms of an undernourished soul or an undernourished body, undernourished emotions. When you nourish yourself, when you nourish your soul, that means to read poetry, read the books that you love, go and spend time in nature, sit in silence, have a spiritual practice, whatever it looks like to you to fill your cup energetically and emotionally, that is what nourishes your soul. Even connecting with your loved ones, with your friends. But also putting yourself out of your comfort zone, going and expanding your mind, expanding your heart, expanding your experience of life. These are all things that nourish your soul. You also need to make sure you're nourishing your body, getting your physical and basic needs met. When we don't meet these emotional, physical, spiritual, mental, energetic needs, we can kind of freeze and sort of go a bit in survival mode. And then we're blocking out our ability to perceive the things that are in our reality, which want to inspire us, which want to call us into certain areas of our life or certain areas of ourself. So you need to make sure that if you're in that space, if you're feeling like you're not inspired, you don't have clarity, you don't have a sense of vision or passion or energy, you need to ask yourself, where can I bring more nourishment into my life? Even if that nourishment means rest, allowing yourself to rest without guilt. Even if that nourishment means asking for help. I know I give a lot of tarot readings to women who have hyper-independence tendencies. And often the message is, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to get your needs met from other people. That particular wound is often rooted in trust. We know that's a whole other topic. But yes, if you're ever creatively blocked, it's because something is not being nourished. So make sure to figure out what that is and why you're not letting yourself receive that. So that's everything that I think I want to talk about for today's episode. Let me know in the comments what you think. We are still working through the archetypal year within my Patreon online temple. I would love for you to join. Currently, we're working through the spring archetypes, which are the maiden, the lover, and the creatrix or the artist. And I'm really enjoying diving into those topics with those of you who are in there. It's kind of a move at your own pace online course. All the content is there once you become a member. And then there's a group chat and I post various things on there regarding those topics. So if you want to join us on that feminine archetypes journey, please do. I'll put the link in the description below. And as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your presence. I appreciate it so much. And I look forward to connecting with you in the next episode. Bye.